Welcome back to Full Circle Endurance. Today, I want to talk about shingles, and very specifically, how does shingles affect endurance athletes? So let's start off with, what is shingles? Shingles is medically known as the herpes zoster virus, and what it actually is a reactivation of the varicella zoster virus, more commonly known as chickenpox. I am 39 years old, and I have now had shingles twice. I was born in 1986, and I contracted chickenpox somewhere around 1990 or 1991, naturally, the way that we did back then. Starting in 1995, there was a chickenpox vaccine available, and this is given to children. The first dose is given at about 12 months of age, and the second dose is usually given between 3 to 5 years of age, somewhere in there. And once someone has had both doses of the chickenpox vaccine, that has been protective since the 1990s, and chickenpox is now no longer a thing the way it was when I was very young. So anyway, once we have chickenpox, for those of us who are old enough to have had it, it basically lies dormant in the nerve tissue. Very specifically, it lies in something called a ganglion, which is near the spinal cord in our nervous system. And what can happen later in life is that for a variety of reasons, that varicella zoster virus gets reactivated, reawakened. And when it does, it gets reactivated or reawakened in a very specific ganglion somewhere in that spinal cord area. And then it travels along the pathway of the nerve where it gets activated. So this is why shingles only affects one side of the body and usually only one part of the body. In my case, I've had it in July 2016, and I had it on the inside of my right leg near my ankle then. And then now in July 2026, it reactivated and came out on the right side of my face. Why did this happen? How does shingles happen? Why do some people get shingles and other people don't? Well, they don't know the exact reason why shingles occurs, but they do know that there are some risk factors, and then there's also some commonalities with folks who get it. So if you're immunocompromised, that puts you at risk of reactivating the shingles virus and developing shingles. If you are over the age of 65, you have a higher risk. So if you're older, if you are female, that's a risk factor because shingles occurs more commonly in women than it does in men. It also occurs in white people more frequently than other races. So for me, I had a few of those risk factors. I'm female, I'm white, I'm not over 65, I'm only 39 right now, but I do have a somewhat oppressed immune system because I did develop long COVID after I had COVID-19 in the early part of the pandemic. I had the Alpha variant and I developed long COVID. And ever since then, I have had a lot of trouble with any illness I contract, including viral infections, and that has seemed to put me at more risk of contracting some things and then having a longer period of illness if I do. So what can you do to protect yourself against shingles? Well, if you're over the age of 50, there are shingles vaccines available that don't necessarily stop you 100% from developing shingles, but if you do develop it, it will reduce the severity of the infection. And Shingrix specifically, which is a name brand shingles vaccine, has been shown to be up to 90% protective if you receive both doses of the shingles vaccine or Shingrix. So you can get that vaccine if you're over the age of 50, but I'm not eligible because I'm only 39. What does shingles look like when you have it? Well, once that virus reawakens or re-enervates, it travels along that neural pathway and it appears on the surface of the skin, right where the nerves end, as a blistering rash. And it can look bruised, it can be very swollen, it can ooze fluid, and it gets its name, shingles, from the fact that it appears in bands. It looks like just strips of blisters in a very particular pattern. It affects a lot of people on their torso or their trunk. I happen to be an anomaly. A, because I'm so young and I've had it twice already, but also because of where I've had it, both on the inside of my leg and then on my face. What are the risk of complications from shingles? Well, there are several risk factors that can occur from having shingles. One of the most common is prolonged nerve pain after the active infection has cleared. And this can go on for months or even years for some people. The other complications can include loss of sight or hearing loss if that nerve that innervates this part of your face or your head is affected. And obviously, with my infection in July 2026, that was a concern once I realized I had shingles again, was would it affect my eye? Would it affect my ear? What can you do once you've identified that you have shingles? They do make antiviral products or medications that are really effective at reducing the severity of an active shingles infection. But it's really important that you get to the doctor within the first 72 hours after you start seeing signs that you have shingles so that they can be maximally effective. And this is especially true, again, if your infection does involve really important systems like your eyes or your ears. Is shingles contagious? Well, this is a bit of a complicated answer because shingles isn't actually contagious, meaning I couldn't give you shingles, but what I can do with my active shingles infection is give chickenpox to somebody who hasn't had chickenpox or hasn't had the chickenpox vaccine. And the reason for this is that the fluid that's in those blisters of the rash is filled with the virus. So unlike chickenpox, which is transmitted via respiratory droplets, this is only possible with a shingles infection if you transfer fluid from somebody who has an active shingles infection to the skin of somebody who has not had chickenpox or who has not had the chickenpox vaccine. So the people that are most at risk for this are infants under the age of 12 months here in the United States of America. So it's not that you can't hold a baby if you have shingles, but you really need to be very careful because shingles can transfer and become chickenpox in them, and chickenpox can be quite severe to children under 12 months of age. What do the symptoms of shingles actually look like in the real world? Well, as mentioned earlier, shingles develops as a really specific rash on the surface of the skin, and it can look bruised, it can be swollen. In my case, when I had it on my face, I could actually see my cheek outside of my eye. That was a little weird. And then that blister fluid can ooze. You are contagious, as mentioned earlier, while that fluid is oozing. Once the rash kind of scabs over or crusts over, you're not considered contagious anymore to be able to transfer it to somebody who hasn't had chickenpox or the chickenpox vaccine. So you do want to be really careful until that time occurs. You can also develop things like joint pain, headaches, some nausea, depending on where you're getting it. And remember, shingles is a viral infection, so it's going to really stress the immune system. And in my case, when I had it in July 2026, I had really big lymph nodes here on the side of my neck. You could actually see them protruding out, and they hurt for like a couple of weeks when I first developed shingles. So how did I know I had shingles for a second time? Well, I'll be honest, it took me a few days to realize it was shingles again, because most people don't develop shingles twice. Most people, if they develop shingles, get it only once. But I happen to be this exception to this rule. So at first it looked like bug bites on my skin, and it was the middle of the summer and I go outside a lot and I'm outside at night. And so I really thought that I had bug bites on my face. But then I had this really severe headache, and I remember it lasting a couple of days. And I mentioned to some people who are close to me, like, this is really weird. I have this really weird headache that I can't clear. At first I thought maybe it was hydration because it was summertime. Maybe it was lack of sleep because it was a really stressful time for me, both work-wise and personally at that time. But then all of a sudden my face started to look really bruised. It got really swollen. Some people even asked me if I had been beaten up, if someone had hurt me, but they hadn't. I had shingles. And then one day, it was a Sunday, I remember, all of a sudden the rash just blistered out and started oozing. And I realized I probably had shingles again. Shingles can be quite painful because, like I said, it's an inflammation and activation along a neural pathway, and so it can cause severe nerve pain. This time, I was really lucky that it was not as severely painful as it was 10 years ago when I had it. I think that's because this time it was on my face and it could stay open and exposed, and clothing wasn't rubbing against it, and my shoe wasn't rubbing against it. Last time it was right where my shoe and my sock meet. So I think that likely irritated the nerves more. So why am I making this video about shingles? Well, because shingles does affect endurance sports training. And I wanted to share a bit about my experience having shingles twice to help any of you out there who might also be experiencing shingles while you're in the middle of training for something. So, shingles is a viral infection, which means it is stressing the immune system of your body. And when the immune system is stressed, no matter what the reason is for that, that means that it only has a finite number of resources to do other things. So, what is endurance sports training? Well, we stress the system, we recover from that stress, and the body adapts to that stress over time. How does that adaptation occur? Well, it uses the immune system. Basically, what endurance sports training does is on a very cellular level, breaks down tissues in the body, and the body rebuilds those tissues back stronger. And that's how we get faster. It's how we're able to lift more weights. It's how we're able to see those gains over time. And the way that the body does that repairing is via the immune system. So if we are stressing our immune system because we are doing endurance sports training, and then we get an active infection of any kind, bacterial, viral, etc., this means that we're trying to divert those resources. So if you have an active shingles infection, this means that the immune system is stressed. The body is going to divert resources to that because that's the primary threat. That viral infection is the primary threat. Endurance sports training is secondary. So even though in our hearts, endurance sports training is more important to the body, it's going to go and divert resources to what it perceives as the real threat or the most threatening thing, and that's the viral infection. So something that I underappreciated really both times that I had shingles, but definitely this time, was that the immune system is actively stressed. Another important thing to note is one of the reasons why they think shingles does get activated in some folks is because of stress. And I know for me, 100% this is true. Both in July 2016 and then again in July 2026, I was experiencing exceptionally high levels of personal stress. I mean, these were two of the most stressful periods in my entire life. And I have no doubt that that stress is what caused me to have shingles at exactly this time, both times in my life before the age of 40. So I'm already under stress, and the body cannot distinguish the source of stress. So whether it's emotional, physical, physiological, because of illness, the body cannot distinguish the source of stress. It knows that it's under stress, but it doesn't care why it's stressed. So again, intellectually, I understand that I was emotionally and personally stressed, and that I was imposing stress via endurance sports training, and that I also had this stress from having shingles, but the body doesn't care. It just knows that it's stress. So I was just this cocktail of stress. And what this meant was, even though I have gotten much better over the years at really listening to my body and honoring my body and not doing things that I used to do when I was younger that were honestly quite stupid and very stubborn, what I did underappreciate this time is that immune system activation in response to my shingles infection was really resource taxing. And so I did reduce down the volume of training that I was doing. I did reduce the intensity. I really listened to my body and only did what was feeling good. But as I've told a lot of the athletes that I've worked with over the years, we always have to plan based on the limiter that's in play. So even if everything else is feeling good, the limiter in my case, while I had an active shingles viral infection, was the viral infection, even if I wasn't experiencing severe symptoms that were physically limiting my ability to run or go ride my bike or to do a strength workout. And what ended up happening is I developed joint pain in my wrists, in my hands, in my elbows, and then also in my right hip. And the right hip pain was really limiting. I ended up having to take 2.5 weeks off of running completely, and it was painful all the time. During the day, when I was walking around, while I was at work, I couldn't lay on my left side and let that leg hang down. It was that painful. And I realized that I didn't have a true overuse injury in the sense of what we typically think about overuse injuries as, but I did have an overuse injury because I did stress that system just a bit too much when I still had an active shingles infection. So what would I do differently? How can you train well with shingles? Well, first of all, you absolutely should listen to your body and listen to your doctor. So if you think you have shingles, please get to your doctor or to a medical provider quickly within 72 hours, because if you get there within 72 hours, you can start on those antivirals and really ramp down your body's response or activation of the virus. Once you're on those antivirals are pretty strong drugs and they're really taxing for the kidneys to metabolize. So even though you might start to look better and maybe even feel better, while you're taking that medication, it's still really taxing on the body and on your metabolism. So it's important to honor that and allow your body to have the resources that it needs to heal. Endurance sports will be here when you're recovered. It will. And even though that may not feel great in the moment, especially if you're like me and you have just built up your fitness and you've just reached some goals that you had for yourself, like I had just reached a goal in my long running that I had for myself for a while that I was trying to build towards. And it was quite disappointing, if I'm being honest, to have to regress and take time off and then kind of restart again and be really thoughtful about my running plan as I built back up, and to be not greedy with what I was trying to get out of my running as I recovered from having this pretty significant viral infection. So get to the doctor, then really listen to your body, but also think with your brain. Understand that even if you don't have really severe symptoms, that your body is being taxed, and really ramp down your volume, ramp down the intensity until you're really through that initial period of about 2 weeks when the virus is really active and your rash is really predominant. When the rash is super visible is generally a good gauge of when the virus is active, though it does take 6 to 8 weeks for the virus to clear. And I don't know if you guys can see this on the camera, but I'm still clearing some final bits here at the bottom of my chin and then here on my neck. It's taken me 7 weeks now to get to this point that it looks like this. So it can be a really long process, and it can be really hard to have patience with that process. But I do think it's possible to still be active while you have a shingles infection, but it's really important that you do listen to your body and you do listen to your doctor and you do think with your brain when you're planning that programming. And if you have a coach who's telling you to go easier or to do less, please listen to them, please, because that's what's going to help you get through this actually faster and with lower probability of injury or complications with resuming that activity. And yes, it is disappointing when you have to regress, but unfortunately, if you get sick, even if it's not the traditional sick of coughing or not being able to breathe or having a stomach infection, it's still sick. Your body is still experiencing a viral infection. And while you have this, make sure that if you're going outside and you're exercising outside, that you are using sunscreen and you're protecting your skin, because while the rash is active especially, you don't want to get sunburn on top of that. For me, putting sunscreen on actually really did hurt a lot, but it was more important to make sure I didn't get sunburned too. So I put up with the pain of having sunscreen on my skin in order to preserve my skin. Finally, it's important to note that when you do raise your blood pressure or your heart rate, and you are exposing yourself to the sun, that will likely irritate the nerves on the surface of your skin if they are somewhere that's visible, like it was for me. And so I noticed for about 6 of these weeks that when I do go outside to run or to ride and my heart rate is a little bit higher, especially in running, that I'm really itchy after or sometimes even during that workout. And then it also like tingles and I do get some pain in my face when I've raised my heart rate or when I've exposed my skin to the sun and I've kind of irritated those nerves. So even though it's better than it was, say, a month ago, I'm still having some residual stuff from that. So know that if you are going to go outside and exercise when you have shingles, that's something that could happen too. Have you had shingles as an endurance athlete? How have you gotten through it? I'd love to hear in the comments what your thoughts are. And thanks for watching.